Welcome back to the sewing room. My name is Chris and this is Sewjourns, where we journey into sewing from pattern reviews to tips, tricks, tutorials on the serger, everything from start to finish. So whatever you want to see, just let me know in the comments. But today we're talking about cutting tools. Are you confused? There's a myriad of scissors and shears, and what's the difference? So let's break it all down. We're going to start with scissors, the difference between scissors and shears. These are scissors. You can tell that they're scissors because they have two of the same size handle. These are blunt edge, rounded edge scissors. Most of the scissors, almost all of the scissors or shears I'm going to show you today are Gingher brand. I'm very, very happy with my Gingher scissors. I love them. They're a very high quality scissor. They're very sharp. They cut, they go on and on and on. I've had them for years and years and years, and I've yet to have to get any sharpened. I do have many pair from which to choose, but they're just wonderful. I really recommend those. And all of the shears and scissors and other tools I'll be talking about today, I'm going to list for you down below in the description box. And there'll be a link there for you. And that way it'll be easy for you to just go and find the pair that best suits you. So before we continue, I'd like to invite you to like and share, subscribe to this channel so that you'll get a little notification on our next video. These are shears. You'll notice that the handles are two different sizes. The larger sort of oval handle and a more round handle for your thumb. These shears are bent shears. They're 8-inch Dressmaker shears. What's really lovely about having these bent shears, where you can see that it's flat here, so when you come down to your fabric, these shears will glide right along your table, so you never have to lift them. Because they're bent, they just glide, and look how beautifully these cut. You can maybe even hear how lovely they cut, and they just cut through a serged seam with no problem. This pair of 8-inch bent Dressmaker shears is the shears that I reach for most often. Next we have another set of shears, and they're shears because again you have two different styles of handles on the one pair. These are straight and they're very pointy, but these are straight. So I wouldn't use these along my sewing table, but rather these are good for cutting fabric. If you're cutting up here, if you're doing any tailoring and you're cutting along a hem, these are perfect for that. Let's put these aside. Here's another massive pair of shears. Let me measure these. I believe these are 12-inch, very heavy Gingher Dressmaker shears. These will take your hand off. These are really terrific for cutting fleece, vinyl, leather, and denim. These long, sharp shears are also really nice if you have a very long fabric that you're cutting out. If you're doing a maxi skirt, you're doing curtains, you're doing pants, as you can make longer cuts and it'll be much smoother. Fleece does tend to dull your shears, so if you can, I advise you to get a pair if you sew with a lot of fleece. If you don't sew with a lot of fleece, then it's fine. But if you sew with a lot of fleece, then you may want to have two pairs. Another type of shear, this again is your 8-inch bent shear. These are featherweight or lightweight. These are terrific. These are also Gingher. If you have some arthritis in your hand, a sore hand, any kind of problem with your hand, maybe you have just weak hands, these lightweight shears, or if you're doing a lot of cutting, maybe you're batch cutting one day, these lightweight shears would be great because it just keeps you from getting tired out. So these are lovely to have on hand. Gingher also makes another pair similar to that. Those are spring-loaded shears. Also, again, Dressmaker shears, but they're spring-loaded. So you just move this little handle up and they pop open. So really the shears are doing the work, which is also great if your hands are tired or weak or recovering from surgery or arthritic. I'm really not working this hard at all. The spring-loaded shears are just popping up and they're doing all of the work. And because they're bent, they just lay really nicely on your cutting table. What's really lovely about the Ginger shears, and I don't work for the Ginger company, I just have them all. All of the Ginger scissors or shears or products come with these protective sheaths that fit over your shears and scissors, and it fits tightly right there in the knob. So not only are you safe when you go in a drawer and try to pick out the pair you want to work with, but they're also protected. The tips are protected. That's really nice because I have all of my scissors and shears in a very long drawer. And so, you know, they're all touching and everything, and this protects them, which is really, really nice. I also have a pair of Kai shears. These are 10-inch. Yes, these are 10-inch Dressmaker shears from Kai. Kai's are gorgeous scissors as well. Kai's and Gingers for me are the top of the line. They're lighter than Ginger. This has more of a padded handle, but they cut, and they cut just as beautifully, and they're just as sharp. Let's get into some specialty shears. These are pinking shears. You can see here the rows of teeth. Maybe you'll see better this way here. The rows of teeth here, pinking shears, and you may remember these from your grandmother or your mother maybe, when they would sew a lot of wovens. So woven fabrics tend to fray on the edges, and your pinking shears will prevent that, or at least slow it down. So here I have some quilting cotton, and you can already see the edges here. But you can take your pinking shears and cut along there. So suppose you've constructed a garment for yourself and you've sewn with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and it tells you to finish the edges. If you have a serger, you may serge the edges, because the serger will wrap the threads around the edges and that will prevent the fraying of your fabric. But you may not have a serger. You can zigzag the edges, or you can use your pinking shears. Pinking shears are used on one layer of fabric though. So if you have a seam with 2 layers of fabric, you'll just want to open up that seam and you'll want to cut one layer through one layer. So let me do that here. So you'll just, and it cuts really lovely through one layer. And you'll just come along here, trim that off, and you see how it finishes the seam? It's also really decorative. Now we're going to talk about thread snips. I have a lot of smaller thread snips. And there are very, very, very many. I'm just going to put some of these out here for you. So you're going to need thread snips. And I recommend you get a few pair of thread snips. Well, one, because I snip my threads after sewing, I put them down, and then, you know, I have to look around for them. These are very simple thread snips. They're spring-loaded, so they're very easy on your hand. They're very inexpensive. I buy these at Walwack. They're just a couple of dollars. And so I have many of these. I only have 2 out on my table, but I have 2 under each of my sewing machines or sergers. And right now I have 4 set up. They're just great for those little threads. So you're sewing, you come out and you just trim right away and you're good. If you'd like a little better thread snip, these are really nice. I don't see, these may be Olfa. They have a little cushion here for your finger and a place for your thumb. So these you have a little more control over. And then I have these very small, what size are these? These are 3/4 inch little scissors, which I also use for thread snips. They're not spring loaded like the snips, but they're really nice. They're really sharp. These are Ginger. I have a matching pair. They're scissors because the handles are both the same shape, rounded. I have a matching pair of shears, which is fun to have. These also travel really well. If you need to have a pair of scissors in your purse, these are perfect for that. And Here is a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier utility scissors. These are great to have around if I'm cutting a neckband or just something that I need to snip. Perhaps I need to snip my serger seam because when I do a neckband, I snip through, but not all the way through the last needle thread, so I can nest my seams. These are perfect. They're heavy duty enough to cut through those serger seams, but they're a great size just to reach for. Here is a very cool specialty pair of scissors. Look at these. Do you see this screw in here and this notch? These are buttonhole scissors. These are also from Ginger. And what's really cool about this is these help you cut through your buttonholes after you make them. And you adjust them by turning the screw further in for larger buttonholes and further out so that it's doesn't cut as long for smaller buttonholes. And I have a sample for you. So here I have 3 different sizes of buttonholes that I made. And I have them in contrasting threads so you can see them. So how these work, and I have one set up. Let me grab my sewing gauge. What you'll do is you'll measure the opening of your buttonhole. Measure the opening of your buttonhole, which is just about an inch. And then you'll set your screw. You want it to be smaller than an inch because you don't want to cut through the top and bottom of your buttonhole. And what you do is, see if you can see this. It's hard to do on camera. You'll measure from the notch. There's a notch right here. You'll measure from that notch until where they come together. So I'm going to try to do that like this. And that is just about an inch. So I'm going to make this just a little smaller. So I'm going to let that out a little bit and measure that. Now I have about 5/8 of an inch. So you take your buttonhole and you put the notch here on your fabric and you put the end right at your buttonhole. And then you cut until the scissors come together. And you cut your buttonhole and it's clean and it's fabulous. Look how clean that is. If I need to cut this very small buttonhole, then I'm going to extend this out much further so that I have only, you can see that this is wider at the top, so it's only going to cut this little piece right here. And I didn't measure it, but let's just say that that's the size just for time's sake. And then I'm going to put it through here, right at the edge of the buttonhole, and cut till it stops. It stopped on its own, and I have that. So those are excellent. Those are really fun to have. There's other ways of opening buttonholes too, but now I want to talk about rotary cutter. This rotary cutter is by Kai, and you can see that it has a straight handle. On the back here, there's a little notch, a knob. But this side says heavy for thick or heavy fabrics, and this says lighter weight for light fabrics. So you don't have to put so much pressure. So what you do is, right now this is locked. I can't use it and the blade is covered and protected. Just a little PSA here. Rotary cutter blades are so very sharp, and I know that you know that, and I know that too, but I have slipped and I've been cut by a rotary blade, and it's really painful, and you get blood on your garment, and that's not fun, but it's just, they're very sharp and they're very dangerous. So having blades, or having a locking blade, which all of my rotary cutters do, is really important. And what I've learned is, after I'm done making my cut, even if I'm going to use it again pretty soon, I lock it, because I've grabbed a rotary cutter that was sitting on my mat and I've cut myself. Okay, back to this. So what you would do is grab some fabric, and let me, I'll use this again. We've got our woven fabric here. It's a lightweight fabric. So I'm going to turn this to where it says light, and that unlocks it. So now when I put pressure on this, when I put it down, that guide moves away to expose the blade. And also, while I'm talking about that, I have my entire table covered with this mat. This mat covers my entire table. It goes from 56 inches into 36 inches. That's the width and length of my table. It's great and I can use it and I use it all the time, but it's not self-healing. So it has a lot of cuts in it and eventually I'll need to replace it. But when I'm doing 2 yards of fabric or whatever, it's really nice to be able to lay out everything on the length of my, it's not quite 2 yards, but I can get a good amount of yardage on this table. But I also have these mats, and this is my favorite mat. Here, of course, it's a Ginger mat because I love the quality of their products, but I don't know if you can see this with the scissors on here, but it's double thickness. It's like 2 mats. It's reversible. But this is doubly thick. I have an Olfa mat and a Fiskars mat, and they are half the width, the thickness I mean. So this is my go-to. And you'll also need, with your rotary cutter, you'll want a quilting ruler. And I recommend you get this size quilting ruler if you're not a quilter. If you're a quilter, you'll have many. You'll have different squares, you'll have different triangles, you'll have different size. But if you are a seamstress, start with this if you're only going to get one. This is 24 inches by 6 inches wide. It's perfect. Okay, so we've got our quilting ruler, which will give you a nice straight edge. And we've got our mat, our self-healing mat. And now we've got our rotary cutter. So I'm just going to line this up here. I have it on lightweight, and when I press on this, it'll expose the blade and make a beautiful cut. And then, like I said, I'm just going to lock it right away. But here we've got that cut, and you've got a beautiful straight edge. Works just as well on knits. A lot of us sew mainly knits. I'm going to I have a double thickness of knit here. So say you're working on folded fabric, you're cutting out mirror images. I'm going to move that over to heavy, and then this is great if you're doing cuffs or neckbands too, because it's so sharp and so great. So that's terrific. Okay, so this is very nice. And I'm going to lock it and put that aside. Here is my Ginger rotary cutter. This is the first one I ever bought. Nice weight. It's really nicely in my hand. And this is how the blade works here. So here the blade is exposed and here it retracts. No, that's wrong. That's the blade. Here it's covered and then I retract the cover and expose the blade. But that works the same way. There is no light or heavy on this, but just the amount of pressure. I may need to change my blade on this, so we'll see. If your blade starts to skip, then you need to change it. Oh no, this one's really nice. That was beautiful. I really like this Ginger rotary cutter. It feels good in my hand. I can feel some weight to it, so I feel like I have control over it. And I like how it curves and fits my hand, but it cuts perfectly every time. And you will want some replacement blades. Ginger makes their own brand of replacement blades, and I do recommend those because I find they last the longest. I also have this lighter weight Olfa rotary cutter. With this one, you press in to unlock it or lock it, and then you press the handle to expose it. So you're pressing the handle at the same, you have to hold this at the same time that you are using it. So this is just something else to think about. It's not my favorite rotary cutter, but it works, it's fine. But can you see the blade on here? It's like a pinking shear blade. If you're cutting out a kimono with some rayon challis is going to fray everywhere. So if you're just cutting it with your shears, your bent shears, you're cutting it, it's really going to fray. But you can use this to cut your wovens and it'll work just like pinking shears. So it's really nice when you're cutting out of your fabric from the table. And let's see if this is made a clean cut. Yeah, you can see it's just stuck right there because I need to change the blade. But you can see the kind of cut it makes, just like your pinking shear. You can also get rotary cutters that are smaller. All of the rotary cutters I've shown you are 45 millimeter. That's pretty standard, middle of the road, what you're gonna use every day. You can get a 60 inch. But then as you try to get the replacement blades, they run a little more money. So just keep that in mind. 45 is pretty standard. It's a nice size. So that refers to the size of the blade, of course. Okay, so these are much smaller. See if this is 28 millimeter, and this is a really small one, and I don't see the size on there right now. What I really like about, and this is Alpha, what I really like to have these little sizes for is these are great for cutting around curves, crotch curves, arm size, scooped necks. So it's so nice and easier to cut, just gets in there really nicely. And if you have a very tight space, suppose you're doing infant clothes and you have a very tight space, this is even smaller, and you can just get in those little corners. Those are nice little extras to have. You can buy your replacement rotary blades, package of 12 of those pinking shear blades. So much less expensive when you buy in bulk. So that's great, because when they get dull and you're using it and it's skipping, I just change the blade, because it's a waste of time if I don't. All right, another thing I want to talk to you about is, here's my first pair of shears, and these are my Fiskar shears, and I still really like them. But since I've gone and upgraded to my Gingers, I've now relegated these to paper. I use them to cut out my paper patterns. I use elastic with these, tie. So in order to remind myself that that's what these are for, I've put a little tie on them. And that's just a quick indication. I like visual indications, because if I'm moving around the sewing room really fast, I like to know that if I grab something and it's not what I need, visually I can tell. So all of the tools that I use for paper and not fabric, I've put a little ribbon around it. Also have a very small utility pair, which is also great for cutting small elastic, FOE, paper, whatever. Also, I know that's what that's for, because I don't want to dull my scissors, my shears, my good ones, on elastic, paper, things like that. They'll last a lot longer and keep your fabric having better cuts. I also have a rotary cutter that I use to cut out my PDF patterns. And I have this on here because you can see this is the same as the one with the pinking blade, but I don't want to grab my other good rotary cutters when I'm cutting out paper patterns. I also can use this, but when you get used to cutting out your patterns with a rotary cutter, it goes much faster. So all of my cutting tools that I use for paper have marked with a ribbon. So here's what you need in your sewing room. It's one last. You need a good self-healing mat. Olfa, Fiskars, Ginger. Really good self-healing mat. And get the largest one you can find, or the largest one that fits your pocketbook. You need your mat and a quilting ruler, and you need a rotary cutter. All you need is one. So you need a rotary cutter, a mat, and a quilting ruler. And then I recommend 8-inch bent Dressmaker shears. Whether you want the featherweight, the spring-loaded, or your regular, and whatever brand, whatever fits your budget. That's going to be your most useful. If you're cutting out heavy-duty things, denim, multiple layers of denim, fleece, minky, leather, vinyl, you may want to invest in a very large 12-inch pair of heavy-duty shears. It'll keep your hand from getting tired because you're making a lot less cuts. You'll want a really nice pair of pinking shears. So I recommend Ginger brand. Kai probably has pinking shears as well, but I'll have all the links for you in the description box down below. And you will want some thread snips. You can go with these little embroidery scissors, or you can go with these spring-loaded, very inexpensive thread snips, but you'll want some thread snips. And that's really all you need to get everything done in your sewing room that you want to get done. These other things, those are all extras, and even the smaller rotary cutters that you may want to add to your collection or to your sewing tools as you move along. I think we have it covered. Thank you for joining me in the sewing room. I love sharing these things with you. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this video. Until next time, continue on your sewing journey. This is Chris.